The crystal chandeliers of Lady Pembroke's ballroom cast dancing shadows across the faces of London's most elite as the scandal unfolded before their horrified eyes. What had begun as whispered gossip behind fans and gloved hands was about to explode into the most shocking public humiliation the Ton had witnessed in decades. Beatrice Langford stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding, as she watched the trap close around the tall, dark-haired stranger who had been nothing but kind to her throughout the evening. She didn't know his name, didn't recognize his face from the endless parade of aristocrats who frequented these gatherings, but something about his quiet dignity and gentle manner had drawn her to him during their brief conversations. Now he stood in the center of a widening circle of spectators, his jaw set with grim determination, as Lord Ashworth, one of society's most vicious gossips, prepared to deliver what would surely be a devastating blow to the man's reputation and social standing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lord Ashworth announced with malicious satisfaction, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom, "I feel it is my duty to inform you that the gentleman you have been so graciously entertaining this evening is nothing more than a fortune-hunting impostor who has been masquerading as a member of polite society." Gasps echoed through the crowd as all eyes turned to the stranger, whose face had gone pale but whose posture remained proud and unbowed. Beatrice felt her stomach clench with sympathy and outrage. She had seen this kind of public destruction before, the way society's elite could turn on someone they perceived as beneath them, tearing apart reputations with the casual cruelty of predators. "Furthermore," Lord Ashworth continued, clearly relishing his moment of power, "I have it on good authority that this man has been using false credentials to gain entry to our most exclusive gatherings, preying upon the generous nature of our hostesses to advance his own sordid agenda." The stranger, who Beatrice had known only as Mr. Evermont during their conversations, stood perfectly still as the accusations washed over him. His dark eyes swept the crowd of faces surrounding him, and Beatrice could see the moment when he realized that no one would defend him, that he was utterly alone in his humiliation. It was that look, the flash of pain and resignation that crossed his handsome features, that shattered Beatrice's paralysis and sent her pushing through the crowd without conscious thought. She had spent her entire 24 years watching from the sidelines as society's powerful destroyed those they deemed unworthy. As the daughter of a minor baron with limited fortune, and even less influence, she had learned early to keep her head down, to avoid drawing attention to herself, to survive by remaining invisible. But something about this man's quiet dignity, about the unfairness of what was happening to him, ignited a fire in her chest that she had never felt before. For once in her life, she was going to act instead of simply observing. For once, she was going to stand up for someone who couldn't defend himself. The crowd parted before her determined advance, their shocked faces blurring as she focused entirely on reaching the man who was about to be destroyed by their collective cruelty. She could hear Lord Ashworth's voice continuing his character assassination, could sense the growing excitement of the spectators as they anticipated the complete social annihilation of their victim. But Beatrice reached him first, without hesitation, without calculation, without any thought for the consequences to her own reputation. She threw her arms around his neck and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was passionate, desperate, and utterly scandalous. The ballroom erupted in chaos. The kiss itself lasted only seconds, but those seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as Beatrice felt the stranger's initial shock give way to instinctive response. His arms came up to steady her, his lips moving against hers, with a warmth and skill that made her head spin and her knees weak. When she finally pulled away, breathing hard and flushed with embarrassment and adrenaline, she found herself staring into the most beautiful dark eyes she had ever seen, eyes that held surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that made her heart race even faster. "My darling," she said loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear, her voice trembling but determined, "how dare anyone question your character or your right to be here? You are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever known, and I won't stand by and watch these people destroy you with their lies and jealousy." The silence that followed her declaration was so complete that the sound of her own heartbeat seemed deafening. Every eye in the ballroom was fixed on her, every face reflecting varying degrees of shock, outrage, and fascination. Lord Ashworth looked as though he had been struck by lightning, his mouth hanging open as he struggled to process this unexpected turn of events. Lady Pembroke appeared to be on the verge of fainting, her fan fluttering frantically as she tried to cool her flushed face. The other guests stood frozen in tableau as if they were actors who had forgotten their lines in the middle of a play. But it was the expression on the stranger's face that held Beatrice's attention. The gratitude in his eyes was unmistakable, but there was something else there as well, a mixture of admiration, concern, and what looked almost like amusement. "Miss," he prompted quietly, his voice carrying a cultured accent that spoke of excellent breeding and education. "Langford," Beatrice replied, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what she had just done. "Beatrice Langford." "Miss Langford," he said with a slight bow that somehow managed to be both formal and intimate, "you have just performed the most extraordinary act of courage I have ever witnessed, but I fear you may have sacrificed your own reputation to save mine." Before Beatrice could respond, Lord Ashworth found his voice again, his face purple with rage and frustration. "This changes nothing," he sputtered. "The man is still an impostor, regardless of whatever this display was meant to accomplish." "An impostor?" The stranger's voice carried a note of quiet amusement that seemed to puzzle several of the onlookers. "That's a serious accusation, Ashworth. I trust you have evidence to support such a claim?" "Evidence?" Lord Ashworth blustered. "Everyone knows you're not who you claim to be. You're some fortune-hunting nobody trying to worm your way into society." "I see," the stranger said mildly. "And who, exactly, do I claim to be?" The question seemed to catch Lord Ashworth off guard, and Beatrice noticed that several of the other guests were beginning to look uncertain. She realized with growing confusion that no one seemed to actually know who this man was. They had simply accepted Lord Ashworth's accusations without question. You introduced yourself as Evermont," Lord Ashworth said, his confidence beginning to waver. "But there is no Evermont family of any standing." "No Evermont family?" The stranger's eyebrows rose in apparent surprise. "How curious. Perhaps you should inform the College of Arms, as they seem to have made an error in their records." A murmur ran through the crowd as the implications of his words began to sink in. Beatrice felt her confusion deepening as she watched the stranger's calm, almost amused demeanor in the face of such serious accusations. "Furthermore," the stranger continued, his voice growing slightly cooler, "I find it interesting that you would make such accusations without bothering to verify the guest list with our hostess. Lady Pembroke, perhaps you could clarify the matter." All eyes turned to Lady Pembroke, who had been standing frozen in shock since Beatrice's dramatic intervention. The elderly woman looked between Lord Ashworth and the stranger with obvious distress, her hands wringing her fan nervously. "That is, she began, then stopped abruptly, her face going even paler. "Yes?" the stranger prompted gently. "Your Grace," Lady Pembroke whispered, the words barely audible but carrying clearly in the silent ballroom. "I am so terribly sorry for this misunderstanding. I had no idea that Lord Ashworth was unaware of your identity." The effect of her words was instantaneous and dramatic. The crowd seemed to collectively draw in its breath, and Beatrice felt the world tilt around her as the full meaning of what she had just heard sank in. "Your Grace." The man she had just kissed, the man she had thrown herself at in front of the entire ton, was not a fortune-hunting impostor. He was a duke. "Allow me to properly introduce myself," the stranger said, his voice carrying a note of dry humor as he turned to address the stunned assembly. "Julian Evermont, Duke of Ravenshollow. I do apologize for any confusion my informal approach to this evening's festivities may have caused." The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Lord Ashworth looked as though he wished the floor would open up and swallow him whole. The other guests stared in various states of shock, embarrassment, and fascination, and Beatrice felt as though she might faint from the sheer impossibility of what had just happened. She had kissed a duke, in front of everyone, to save him from humiliation, except he hadn't needed saving at all. "Miss Langford," the duke said quietly, turning back to her with an expression that was gentle and concerned. "Are you quite all right? You look rather pale." Beatrice stared up at him, her mind reeling as she tried to process the magnitude of her mistake. She had just created the scandal of the season by kissing one of the most powerful men in England. Her reputation was ruined, her family would be mortified, and she would probably be banished from society forever. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know. I was trying to help." "And you did help," the Duke said firmly, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You showed more courage and loyalty in those few moments than most people display in a lifetime. You defended someone you believed was being wronged, without thought for the cost to yourself. That is not something to apologize for." "But I've ruined everything," Beatrice said, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "My reputation, your reputation, my family's standing—" "Have you?" the Duke asked, glancing around the ballroom with raised eyebrows. "It seems to me that you've simply given society something far more interesting to talk about than Lord Ashworth's unfounded accusations." Indeed, the atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted dramatically. Where moments before there had been the ugly excitement of watching someone's destruction, now there was the electric buzz of witnessing something unprecedented and romantic. The guests were whispering among themselves, their expressions ranging from scandalized to envious to thoroughly entertained. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Duke said, raising his voice to address the crowd, "I believe we have provided quite enough entertainment for one evening. Miss Langford, would you do me the honor of allowing me to escort you to some refreshment? I believe we have much to discuss." As he offered her his arm with perfect courtesy, Beatrice realized that she had no choice but to accept. To refuse would only make the situation worse, and she was already in far too deep to worry about propriety now. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said quietly, placing her trembling hand on his arm. As they walked through the crowd toward the refreshment room, Beatrice was acutely aware of every whisper, every stare, every shocked expression that followed their progress. Her life had just changed irrevocably, and she had no idea what the consequences would be. But as she glanced up at the Duke's profile, noting the strength of his jaw and the kindness in his dark eyes, she found that she couldn't entirely regret her impulsive action. Whatever happened next, she had acted with courage and compassion, and that was something she could be proud of. Even if it had just created the scandal of the century. The aftermath. The Duke's private withdrawing room at Lady Pembroke's mansion was a haven of quiet elegance compared to the chaos they had left behind in the ballroom. Beatrice sank gratefully into a silk-upholstered chair, her hands still trembling as she accepted the glass of wine the Duke offered her. "I still cannot believe what I've done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've created the most dreadful scandal, and all for nothing. You didn't need my protection at all." Duke Julian Evermont settled into the chair across from her, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Even in her mortification, she couldn't help but notice how devastatingly handsome he was, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of aristocratic features that belonged in classical sculptures, and an air of quiet authority that spoke of generations of noble breeding. "On the contrary," he said, his voice carrying that same note of gentle amusement she had detected earlier, "I believe your intervention was perfectly timed and absolutely necessary." Beatrice looked up at him in confusion. "How can you say that? You're a duke. Lord Ashworth's accusations couldn't have truly harmed you, couldn't they?" Julian leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Miss Langford, you may be surprised to learn that even dukes can be vulnerable to the poison of malicious gossip. Ashworth's accusations, while false, could have planted seeds of doubt that might have grown into something far more damaging. But surely your position, your reputation, are exactly what make me a target for men like Ashworth," Julian interrupted gently. "You see, Miss Langford, I am not only the Duke of Ravenshollow, but also one of the wealthiest men in England. That combination makes me both powerful and envied, which means I have many enemies who would be delighted to see me brought low." Beatrice felt her stomach sink as the implications of his words became clear. "You mean there are people who would have believed Lord Ashworth's lies simply because they wanted them to be true?" "Precisely. And once such rumors take hold, they can be remarkably difficult to dispel regardless of their veracity." Julian's expression grew more serious. "Your intervention not only stopped Ashworth's attack before it could gain momentum, but it also demonstrated something far more valuable than any denial I could have offered." "What do you mean?" "You showed the entire ton that someone was willing to risk everything to defend me. Someone who had no reason to lie, no ulterior motive, no personal gain to be had from protecting my reputation. Your courage spoke louder than any words could have." Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes as she realized the truth of what he was saying. In her impulsive attempt to save him, she had indeed accomplished something significant, but at what cost to herself? "But my reputation is ruined," she said quietly. "No respectable family will receive me after tonight. I've kissed a man in public, claimed an intimacy that doesn't exist, made myself the subject of the worst kind of gossip. My father will be mortified, my prospects for marriage destroyed." "Will they be?" Julian asked, his tone thoughtful. "Miss Langford, may I ask you something rather personal?" Beatrice nodded, though she couldn't imagine what could be more personal than what had already transpired between them. "What were your prospects for marriage before tonight?" The question hit her like a physical blow, forcing her to confront the painful reality of her situation. That is, they were limited, she admitted reluctantly. Because I am 24 years old, the daughter of a minor baron with a modest fortune, and I have been on the marriage mart for 6 seasons without receiving a single serious offer, Beatrice said, the words tumbling out in a rush of embarrassed honesty. I am not beautiful enough to overcome my lack of dowry, not wealthy enough to overcome my lack of beauty, and not young enough to overcome either deficiency. Julian's expression softened with something that looked almost like tenderness. And yet tonight you showed more beauty, true beauty of character, than any of the acclaimed diamonds of the ton. You acted with courage, compassion, and selfless loyalty. Those are qualities that any sensible man would prize above conventional prettiness or a large dowry. You're very kind, Your Grace, but we both know that society doesn't value such qualities in women. They want youth, beauty, and fortune, preferably all 3. Society is often wrong about what truly matters, Julian said firmly. But that aside, I think you may be underestimating the impact of tonight's events on your social standing. Beatrice looked at him in confusion. I don't understand. How could creating such a scandal possibly improve my situation? Because, my dear Miss Langford, you have just become the most talked about woman in London. Every hostess in the city will be desperate to secure your attendance at their gatherings, if only to hear the story firsthand. Every gentleman will be curious about the woman who captured the attention of the Duke of Ravenshollow so dramatically. You have, in the space of a few minutes, transformed yourself from an overlooked wallflower into the most fascinating woman of the season. The idea was so preposterous that Beatrice almost laughed. Your Grace, I think you overestimate society's capacity for forgiveness. What I did was scandalous beyond redemption. What you did was romantic beyond belief, Julian corrected. You threw yourself into danger to protect someone you cared about, without thought for the consequences. That is the stuff of novels and poetry, Miss Langford. Society may be shocked, but they are also enchanted. Before Beatrice could respond, there was a soft knock at the door, and Lady Pembroke's voice called out hesitantly, Your Grace? Miss Langford? I do hope I'm not intruding, but there have been some developments. Come in, Lady Pembroke, Julian called, rising to his feet as their hostess entered the room. Lady Pembroke looked flustered but oddly excited, her earlier distress replaced by something that looked almost like glee. Your Grace, Miss Langford, I felt I should inform you that the ballroom is absolutely buzzing with the most extraordinary reactions to this evening's events. What sort of reactions? Beatrice asked, dreading the answer. Well, my dear, it seems that opinion is rather divided. The older, more conservative guests are certainly scandalized, but the younger set, particularly the ladies, are calling it the most romantic thing they've ever witnessed. Lady Caroline Ashford declared that she wished she had half your courage, and Lord Pemberton said he had never seen anything so magnificently dramatic. Beatrice felt her head spinning as she tried to process this unexpected information. They approve. Not all of them, certainly, but far more than you might expect. And, Miss Langford, I have received no fewer than 7 requests for your direction from gentlemen who wish to call upon you tomorrow. 7, Beatrice repeated faintly. Including Lord Westfield, Mr. Harrington Smythe, and the Earl of Blackwood, Lady Pembroke continued with obvious satisfaction. It seems your dramatic gesture has made you quite the sought-after young lady. Julian's smile was triumphant as he turned back to Beatrice. As I predicted, you have not ruined your reputation, Miss Langford. You have made it. But what about Lord Ashworth? Beatrice asked, still struggling to believe that her impulsive action could have had such positive consequences. Lady Pembroke's expression darkened. Lord Ashworth has left the ball in considerable disgrace. His unfounded accusations against His Grace have been universally condemned, and I believe he will find himself quite unwelcome in polite society for some time to come. Good, Julian said with satisfaction. The man has been spreading malicious gossip for years. It's time he faced some consequences for his behavior. As Lady Pembroke excused herself to return to her guests, Beatrice found herself alone with the Duke once again, her mind reeling from the unexpected turn of events. I still can't believe this is happening, she said, shaking her head in amazement. This morning I was a confirmed spinster with no prospects, and now you are a woman who has captured the imagination of London society, Julian finished. The question is, what do you intend to do with this newfound attention? Beatrice looked up at him, suddenly aware that they had been speaking as though they were old friends, rather than virtual strangers who had shared one shocking moment of intimacy. I suppose I should thank you, Your Grace, for being so understanding about my impulsive behavior. and I should apologize again for the liberty I took. Miss Langford, Julian said, moving closer to her chair, I want you to understand something very clearly. You have nothing to apologize for. What you did tonight was brave, generous, and utterly admirable. Any man would be honored to be the recipient of such loyalty and courage, even if it was based on a complete misunderstanding of the situation. Especially then, Julian said firmly. You acted purely from the goodness of your heart, without any thought of personal gain. That kind of selflessness is extraordinarily rare, Miss Langford, and I find myself more grateful for it than you can possibly imagine. There was something in his voice, something deeper than mere gratitude, that made Beatrice's heart skip a beat. She looked up into his dark eyes and saw an intensity there that took her breath away. Your Grace, she said quietly, I should probably return to the ballroom. People will talk if we remain secluded much longer. People are already talking, Julian pointed out with a slight smile. But you're right, we should make an appearance. However, before we do, I have a proposition for you. A proposition. Miss Langford, you have just done me an enormous service and I find myself in your debt. I would like to repay that debt by helping you navigate the social opportunities that your dramatic gesture has created. Beatrice felt her pulse quicken at the implications of his offer. What exactly are you suggesting, Your Grace? I am suggesting that we allow society to draw its own conclusions about the nature of our acquaintance. If people believe that there is some understanding between us, it will only enhance your newfound popularity and ensure that you are treated with the respect you deserve. You want to pretend that we are involved? Beatrice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to ensure that your courageous act tonight leads to the happiness and security you deserve, Julian replied. If that requires allowing people to believe that the Duke of Ravenshollow has been thoroughly enchanted by Miss Beatrice Langford, then I am more than willing to play that role. The offer was so generous, so unexpected, that Beatrice felt tears gathering in her eyes once again. But what about your reputation, your own marriage prospects? Surely you cannot want to tie yourself to someone like me, even temporarily. Julian's expression grew serious, and he knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Miss Langford, Beatrice, you seem to have a very poor opinion of your own worth, but I see something in you that is far more valuable than conventional beauty or a large dowry. I see strength, courage, loyalty, and a capacity for love that most people never develop. Any man would be fortunate to earn your affection. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Beatrice found herself staring into his eyes with growing wonder. Was it possible that this extraordinary man actually meant what he was saying? Could her impulsive act of courage have led to something more than just social rehabilitation? Your Grace, she said softly, I accept your proposition, but I want you to know that I will understand completely if you change your mind once the excitement of tonight wears off. I won't, Julian said with quiet certainty. In fact, I suspect that the more I come to know you, the more convinced I will become that tonight's events were not a mistake, but a gift. As he helped her to her feet and offered his arm once again, Beatrice felt as though she were living in a dream. In the space of a single evening, her entire life had been transformed by one impulsive act of courage. She had kissed a duke to save him from humiliation, only to discover that she had saved the richest, most powerful man in England, and that he was grateful enough to offer her something she had never dared to hope for. The chance at a real future, the possibility of love, the promise that her courage might be rewarded with the happiness she had always believed was beyond her reach. As they walked back toward the ballroom together, Beatrice couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this extraordinary night might have in store. The morning after, Beatrice woke the next morning with the disorienting sensation that she had dreamed the entire extraordinary evening. Surely she couldn't have actually kissed the Duke of Ravenshollow in front of half of London society. Surely she couldn't have transformed herself from an overlooked spinster into the most talked-about woman of the season with a single impulsive gesture. But as she sat up in her narrow bed in her father's modest townhouse, the events of the previous night came flooding back with crystal clarity. The memory of Julian's lips against hers, the shocked gasps of the crowd, the feel of his strong arms steadying her, it had all been devastatingly real. Beatrice! Her father's voice boomed through the house, accompanied by the sound of his heavy footsteps on the stairs. Beatrice, come down here immediately. We must discuss this catastrophe. With a sinking heart, Beatrice realized that news of her scandalous behavior had already reached her family. She dressed quickly in a simple morning gown and made her way downstairs to face what she was certain would be a lecture of epic proportions. She found Baron Langford pacing back and forth in their small drawing room, his face red with agitation and a newspaper clutched in his trembling hands. Her stepmother, Lady Langford, sat rigidly on the sofa, her expression a mixture of horror and barely concealed excitement. "Explain this," her father demanded, thrusting the newspaper toward her. "Explain how my daughter's name has appeared in the society pages in connection with the most scandalous behavior imaginable." Beatrice took the paper with trembling fingers and read the headline that made her stomach drop. "Duke's Dramatic Rescue. Miss B.L. creates sensation at Lady Pembroke's ball." The article that followed was a masterpiece of innuendo and speculation, describing her passionate defense of the Duke and suggesting that there was more to the story than meets the eye. While it stopped short of explicitly describing the kiss, it left little doubt about what had transpired. "Father," Beatrice began carefully, "I can explain—" "Can you?" Baron Langford interrupted, his voice rising with each word. "Can you explain how you came to be involved in such a public display with the Duke of Ravenshollow? Can you explain how our family name has been dragged through the scandal sheets? Can you explain how you have managed to ruin yourself so completely?" "Actually," Lady Langford interjected with obvious excitement, "I'm not certain she has ruined herself at all. Look at this." She produced a silver salver piled high with calling cards and invitations. "These arrived this morning, all addressed to Beatrice. Invitations to tea, requests for calls, even an invitation to Lady Worthington's exclusive music hall next week." Baron Langford stared at the pile of correspondence in amazement. But how is this possible? After such a scandal?" "Because it wasn't really a scandal, Papa," Beatrice said quietly, finally finding her voice. "It was something else entirely." Before she could explain further, their elderly butler, Higgins, appeared in the doorway, with an expression of barely contained awe. "Begging your pardon, my lord, but there is a gentleman caller for Miss Beatrice. The Duke of Ravenshollow is requesting an audience." The silence that followed this announcement was so complete that the ticking of the mantel clock seemed unnaturally loud. Baron Langford's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and finally a kind of desperate hope. "The Duke is here? Calling on Beatrice?" "Yes, my lord, he's waiting in the front parlour." Lady Langford leaped to her feet with an energy that belied her usual languid demeanour. "Beatrice, you must change immediately. That gown is entirely unsuitable for receiving a duke. And your hair, we must do something with your hair." "I think I look perfectly acceptable," Beatrice protested, though her heart was racing at the thought of seeing Julian again. "Acceptable is not sufficient when receiving the Duke of Ravenshollow," Lady Langford declared. "You must look magnificent." "Perhaps," Baron Langford said slowly, his businessman's instincts beginning to override his paternal outrage. "We should not keep His Grace waiting too long. Beatrice, go and make yourself presentable, but be quick about it." 20 minutes later, having been subjected to Lady Langford's ministrations and dressed in her finest morning gown, Beatrice made her way to the front parlour with her heart pounding. She found Julian standing by the window, his tall frame elegant in a perfectly tailored coat of dark blue superfine, his dark hair gleaming in the morning sunlight. He turned as she entered, and the smile that spread across his handsome features made her knees weak. "Miss Langford," he said, bowing formally, "how lovely you look this morning. I trust you slept well after last evening's excitement." "Your Grace," Beatrice replied with a curtsy, acutely aware of her parents hovering in the doorway behind her. "I slept as well as could be expected given the circumstances." "Excellent. I was hoping you might join me for a drive in the park this afternoon. I thought it would be beneficial for us to be seen together, to clarify the situation for society." The suggestion sent a thrill of excitement through Beatrice, though she tried to maintain her composure. "I would be delighted, Your Grace." "Wonderful. Shall we say 3 o'clock? "Perfect." Julian's eyes twinkled with amusement as he glanced toward the doorway where Baron Langford and Lady Langford were making no attempt to hide their fascination with the conversation. "Perhaps I might have a word with your father before I take my leave," he suggested. "Of course, Your Grace." The private conversation between Julian and Baron Langford lasted only a few minutes, but when her father emerged from the parlour, his expression had transformed completely. Gone was the angry, worried man who had confronted her that morning. In his place was someone who looked as though he had just been handed the key to the kingdom. "Beatrice," he said with obvious satisfaction, "His Grace has explained the situation most thoroughly. It seems that your dramatic gesture last evening was not the scandal I initially believed it to be." "What did he tell you?" Beatrice asked, curious about Julian's version of events. He explained that you acted with great courage to defend him against false accusations and that he is deeply grateful for your loyalty. He also indicated that he finds your character and courage most admirable. The careful way her father spoke suggested that Julian had been diplomatically vague about the exact nature of his interest, but had left no doubt that his intentions were honourable. Furthermore, Baron Langford continued, His Grace has invited our entire family to attend the theatre with him next week. It seems that society's opinion of last evening's events has been far more favourable than we initially feared. Lady Langford clasped her hands together in delight. The theatre with the Duke of Ravenshollow, Beatrice. Do you realise what this means? Beatrice was beginning to understand exactly what it meant. Julian was not only keeping his promise to help her navigate her newfound social prominence, but he was doing so in a way that would elevate her entire family's standing in society. That afternoon, as she sat beside Julian in his elegant curricle during the fashionable hour in Hyde Park, Beatrice marvelled at the transformation in her circumstances. Every head turned as they passed. Every conversation stopped as people strained to catch a glimpse of the couple who had created such a sensation the night before. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Julian observed with amusement, as they acknowledged yet another group of curious onlookers. I confess I am, Beatrice admitted. Yesterday I was invisible, and today I am the centre of attention. It's quite intoxicating. And well-deserved. You should have been the centre of attention long before now. Your Grace, Beatrice said quietly, I must ask, how long do you intend to continue this charade? I am grateful beyond words for your kindness, but I don't want to impose on your generosity indefinitely. Julian was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins as he guided his matched pair of chestnuts through the park. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of seriousness that made her heart skip a beat. Beatrice, I want you to understand something. What began as a desire to repay your kindness has become something far more significant, at least for me. What do you mean? I mean that the more time I spend with you, the more convinced I become that last night's events were not a mistake, but a gift. You have shown me qualities that I had begun to believe no longer existed in our world. Courage, loyalty, selflessness, genuine warmth. These are not things that can be feigned or taught. They are fundamental aspects of character. Beatrice felt her breath catch as she absorbed the implications of his words. Your Grace, are you saying... I am saying that what began as a pretense is becoming something very real, at least on my part. I find myself genuinely attracted to you, Beatrice, not just grateful for your defense of me, but drawn to you as a woman, as a person, as someone I would very much like to know better. The confession hung in the air between them, more shocking in its own way than anything that had happened the night before. Beatrice stared at his profile, noting the strength of his jaw, the intelligence in his dark eyes, the way his hands held the reins with confident control. But I'm not the sort of woman that dukes typically, she began, then stopped, frustrated by her inability to articulate her confusion. You're not the sort of woman that dukes typically marry? Julian finished for her. Perhaps that's exactly why I find you so appealing. I have been pursued by every eligible woman in London for the past 5 years, Beatrice. They have offered me beauty, accomplishments, connections, and fortunes. But not one of them has ever offered me what you gave me last night, genuine, selfless loyalty. But marriage, Beatrice whispered, hardly daring to voice the word, is exactly what I am beginning to contemplate, Julian said firmly. Not immediately, of course. We barely know each other despite the dramatic nature of our introduction, but I would very much like the opportunity to court you properly, to discover whether this attraction I feel might develop into something deeper. Beatrice felt tears gathering in her eyes as the impossibility of what he was suggesting sank in. Your Grace, Julian, you cannot be serious. The difference in our stations, our fortunes, our entire worlds, are far less important than the compatibility of our characters, Julian interrupted. Beatrice, I am 32 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and possessed of a title that opens every door in England. I can have my choice of any woman in the kingdom, but I have never met anyone who made me feel the way you did last night. Protected, valued, genuinely cared for rather than pursued for my position. And you think that feeling might be enough to build a marriage on? I think it's a far better foundation than most marriages in our circle possess, Julian replied. But I don't want you to give me an answer now. I want you to take time to consider the possibility, to get to know me as I hope to know you. Will you allow me to court you, Beatrice? Will you give us both the chance to discover what might develop between us? As they completed their circuit of the park and headed back toward her father's house, Beatrice found herself faced with the most momentous decision of her life. The man beside her was offering her everything she had ever dreamed of and more, not just security and position, but the possibility of genuine love and partnership. "Yes," she said quietly, the word barely audible above the sound of the carriage wheels on the gravel path. "Yes, Julian, I would be honored to allow you to court me." The smile that spread across his face was radiant, transforming his aristocratic features with pure joy. "Then we shall see where this extraordinary adventure leads us, shall we not?" As he helped her down from the curricle outside her father's house, Beatrice reflected on the incredible turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she had been a forgotten spinster with no prospects and no hope. Now she was being courted by the Duke of Ravenshollow, the richest and most eligible man in England, all because she had kissed him in front of everyone to save him from humiliation. It was the beginning of the most remarkable love story London society had ever witnessed. Their courtship. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of social engagements, each more glittering than the last. True to his word, Julian courted Beatrice with a determination and public attention that left no doubt about the seriousness of his intentions. They were seen together at the opera, at fashionable dinner parties, at exclusive soirees, and during the daily promenade in Hyde Park. Society's initial shock at the unlikely pairing gradually gave way to fascination and eventually acceptance. The Duke's obvious devotion to his unusual choice of bride, combined with Beatrice's natural grace and intelligence, won over even the most skeptical observers. "I must admit," Lady Worthington confided to her friend Lady Pembroke during one of their regular gossip sessions, "I was quite prepared to disapprove of the Duke's choice, but Miss Langford has proven to be utterly charming. She's intelligent, well-read, and possesses a warmth that is quite refreshing after so many seasons of simpering debutantes." "Indeed," Lady Pembroke agreed with obvious satisfaction, "and have you seen the way His Grace looks at her? I haven't witnessed such genuine affection between a couple in years. It's quite romantic, really." For Beatrice, the transformation in her circumstances was nothing short of miraculous. Where once she had been relegated to the wallflower section at balls, now she found herself seated at the most prestigious tables, sought after by hostesses who had previously overlooked her entirely. The invitations that had once been polite obligations extended to her father's family were now genuine expressions of desire for her company. But more important than the social elevation was the growing connection between herself and Julian. Their courtship, which had begun as a mutually beneficial arrangement, was developing into something far deeper and more meaningful. "Tell me about your childhood," Julian said one afternoon, as they strolled through the gardens at Kensington Palace, having been granted special permission to walk the private grounds. "I want to understand what shaped you into the remarkable woman you've become." Beatrice smiled at his interest, still amazed by his genuine curiosity about her thoughts and experiences. "It was quite ordinary, I'm afraid. My mother died when I was 12 and my father remarried within the year. My stepmother is kind enough, but she had her own children to focus on, and I learned early to be self-sufficient." "That explains your independence and strength of character," Julian observed. "But what about your education, your interests? You speak with such intelligence about literature and politics. That doesn't happen by accident." "My father, whatever his other faults, believes in education for women. He ensured I had excellent tutors, and he allowed me access to his library. I spent most of my youth reading everything I could find: history, philosophy, novels, poetry. Books became my companions when people failed me." Julian's expression grew tender as he absorbed this glimpse into her solitary past. "And now, do you still prefer books to people?" "Not all people," Beatrice replied softly, meeting his gaze with a directness that made his heart race. "I've discovered that the right person can be far more fascinating than any book." Their conversations during these private moments revealed a compatibility that went far beyond their initial attraction. They shared similar views on social issues, enjoyed the same authors, and found themselves able to discuss everything from politics to philosophy with an ease that surprised them both. "I never expected to find intellectual companionship in marriage," Julian confessed, during one of their evening walks through her father's small garden. "Most of the women I've known have been trained to defer to masculine opinions rather than express their own. And I never expected to find a man who valued my opinions rather than merely tolerating them," Beatrice replied. "Can you actually listen when I speak, Julian? You consider my thoughts worthy of discussion rather than dismissing them as feminine fancy, because they are worthy of discussion. Your insights are often more perceptive than those of my male colleagues in Parliament. You see connections and implications that others miss entirely. It was during one of these intimate conversations that Julian first mentioned his estate and the responsibilities that would come with being his Duchess. Ravenshollow Park encompasses nearly 20,000 acres, he explained, as they sat together in the conservatory of his London mansion, surrounded by exotic plants that filled the air with their sweet fragrance. The estate employs over 300 people directly and supports nearly 1,000 more in the surrounding villages. The Duchess traditionally oversees the household management, the estate's charitable activities, and serves as a liaison between the ducal family and the tenants. 300 people, Beatrice repeated, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the responsibility. And they would all be looking to me for guidance and support. They would, Julian confirmed, but you wouldn't be starting from nothing. Mrs. Whitmore, my housekeeper, has been managing the domestic arrangements since my mother's death 5 years ago. She's both competent and loyal, and she would help you learn the routines and expectations. As for the charitable work and tenant relations, I believe your natural compassion and organizational abilities would serve you well. You have such faith in my abilities, Beatrice said with wonder. Sometimes, I think you see qualities in me that don't actually exist. On the contrary, Julian replied, taking her hands in his, I think you consistently underestimate your own capabilities. You've managed your father's household efficiently for years. You've navigated the complexities of London society with grace and intelligence. And you've won over even my most skeptical friends with your charm and wit. These are not small accomplishments, Beatrice. But managing a ducal estate is something entirely different. The scale, the responsibility, the expectations. What if I fail? What if I prove inadequate to the demands of being your Duchess? Julian's expression grew serious, and he moved closer to her on the garden bench they shared. Beatrice, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to marry me because I need a Duchess to manage my estate. I have competent staff for that. I'm asking you to marry me because I've fallen in love with you, with your courage, your intelligence, your warmth, your capacity for loyalty and compassion. Everything else is secondary. The declaration hung in the air between them, more shocking in its own way than their dramatic first encounter. Beatrice stared into his dark eyes, seeing the sincerity and depth of feeling that made her heart race and her breath catch. You love me, she whispered, hardly daring to believe what she had heard. Completely and irrevocably, Julian confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. I know it seems impossible after such a brief acquaintance, but I've never felt anything like this before. You've become essential to my happiness, Beatrice. I can't imagine my future without you in it. Tears gathered in Beatrice's eyes as the full meaning of his words sank in. This extraordinary man, this duke who could have his choice of any woman in England, had chosen her. Not for her beauty or her fortune or her connections, but for herself. And I love you, she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. I love your kindness, your integrity, your willingness to see value where others see only flaws. I love the way you make me feel, worthy, cherished, capable of being more than I ever thought possible. The kiss that followed was tender and passionate, full of promise for the future they would build together. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and glowing with happiness. Marry me, Julian said simply. Not because society expects it, not because it's convenient, but because I love you and want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me. Yes, Beatrice replied without hesitation. Yes, Julian, I will marry you. The engagement announcement appeared in the Times the following morning, creating another sensation in London society. The Duke of Ravenshollow, one of England's most eligible bachelors, was to marry Miss Beatrice Langford, the woman who had captured his heart with a single act of courage. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive, with even the most conservative members of society expressing approval of the match. The romantic story of their meeting had captured the public imagination, and Beatrice found herself transformed from an unknown spinster into something approaching a fairy tale heroine. It's quite extraordinary, Lady Caroline Ashford commented to her mother as they read the announcement over breakfast. Who would have thought that kissing a man in public could lead to such a brilliant marriage? It wasn't the kiss itself, darling, her mother replied wisely. It was the courage and loyalty that motivated it. The Duke saw something special in Miss Langford's character, and he was wise enough to recognize its value. The wedding preparations began immediately, with Julian insisting on the finest of everything for his bride. Madame Dubois, London's most exclusive modiste, was commissioned to create a trousseau worthy of a duchess, while the most fashionable shops in Bond Street competed for the honor of outfitting the future Duchess of Ravenshollow. "I feel like Cinderella," Beatrice confessed to Julian as they reviewed the seemingly endless lists of preparations required for their wedding. "6 months ago I was wearing the same 3 dresses in rotation, and now I have more gowns than I could wear in a year." "You deserve every beautiful thing I can give you," Julian replied, his eyes warm with affection. "You've brought such joy into my life, Beatrice. I want to shower you with everything you've been denied." "You've already given me more than I ever dared to dream of," she said softly. "Your love, your respect, your faith in my abilities, these are worth more than all the gowns and jewels in the world." The wedding itself was to be a grand affair, befitting the union of one of England's most powerful dukes. Westminster Abbey had been secured for the ceremony, with a guest list that included members of the royal family, prominent politicians, and the cream of London society. "Are you nervous?" Julian asked, as they stood together in the garden of his estate during one of their final meetings before the wedding. "Terrified," Beatrice admitted honestly. "Not about marrying you, that's the one thing I'm completely certain about, but about everything else. The ceremony, the reception, meeting all those important people, becoming a duchess. It's overwhelming." "You'll be magnificent," Julian assured her, taking her hands in his. "You've already won over everyone who matters to me. The rest is just ceremony and tradition. What's important is that at the end of the day we'll be married, and we can begin our life together." "Our life together," Beatrice repeated, savoring the words. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is really happening. That you chose me, that we found each other, that something so beautiful could come from such an impulsive moment." "It wasn't impulsive," Julian corrected gently. "It was instinctive. You saw someone you believed needed help, and you acted without thought for the consequences. That kind of selfless courage is exactly what drew me to you, and it's exactly what will make you an extraordinary duchess." The wedding day dawned bright and clear, with London society turning out in force to witness the union that had captivated the public imagination. Westminster Abbey was filled to capacity with guests eager to see the culmination of the most romantic story of the season. Beatrice, resplendent in ivory silk and Brussels lace, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, with her head held high and her heart full of joy. The sight of Julian waiting for her at the altar, magnificent in his formal attire and glowing with happiness, made her feel as though she were floating rather than walking. The ceremony itself was a blur of ancient words and sacred promises, but the moment when Julian slipped the ducal ring onto her finger was crystal clear. She was no longer Miss Beatrice Langford, overlooked spinster. She was the Duchess of Ravenshollow, beloved wife of one of England's most powerful men. "I present to you," the Archbishop announced with obvious satisfaction, "His Grace the Duke of Ravenshollow, and Her Grace the Duchess of Ravenshollow." The Abbey erupted in applause and congratulations, but Beatrice was aware only of Julian's eyes on her face, warm with love and pride and satisfaction. "How does it feel to be a duchess?" he asked quietly as they signed the marriage register. "Like coming home," Beatrice replied honestly, "like finding the place I was always meant to be." The wedding breakfast that followed was a glittering affair, with speeches from prominent politicians and toasts from members of the royal family. But for Beatrice and Julian, the most meaningful moments were the quiet ones, the gentle squeeze of his hand under the table, the private smile they shared across the crowded room, the whispered words of love that no one else could hear. "Your Grace," Lord Pemberton approached Beatrice during the reception, his expression warm with genuine affection, "I must tell you how delighted I am to welcome you to our circle. Julian is like a brother to me, and I have never seen him so happy. You have given him a gift beyond price." "He has given me far more than I have given him," Beatrice replied with a smile that radiated contentment. "I am the one who has received the gift beyond price." As the afternoon wore on and the last guest departed, Beatrice found herself alone with her new husband in the elegant drawing room of their London home. The magnitude of what had happened was beginning to sink in. She was now the Duchess of Ravenshollow, one of the most powerful women in England, married to a man who loved her for exactly who she was. "No regrets?" Julian asked, settling beside her on the silk-upholstered sofa and taking her hand in his. "None whatsoever," Beatrice replied firmly. "Though I must admit, I'm still having difficulty believing this is all real. A few months ago I was a forgotten spinster with no prospects and no hope. Now I'm married to the most wonderful man in England and have a position I never dared to dream of. It's real," Julian assured her, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. "And it's only the beginning. We have a lifetime ahead of us to build something beautiful together. What happens now?" Beatrice asked, suddenly aware that they were truly alone for the first time since their engagement. "Now," Julian said with a smile that made her heart race, "we begin our honeymoon. I thought we might spend a few days here in London, allowing you to adjust to your new role, and then travel to Ravenshollow Park so you can see your new home." "I would like that very much," Beatrice said, though she felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of the more intimate aspects of marriage that lay ahead. Julian seemed to sense her apprehension, because his expression grew gentle and reassuring. "Beatrice, I want you to know that there is no pressure, no expectations beyond what you are comfortable with. We have time to learn about each other, to grow into our marriage at whatever pace feels right to both of us." His consideration and patience only made her love him more, and Beatrice felt her nervousness beginning to fade. "Julian, I may be inexperienced, but I am not afraid. You have shown me nothing but kindness and respect, and I trust you completely." The kiss that followed was tender and passionate, full of promise for the future they would build together. As they held each other close in the elegant drawing room of their London home, both Beatrice and Julian knew that they had found something rare and precious, a love that transcended social convention, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. 1 year later, the gardens of Ravenshollow Park were in full bloom as Beatrice walked among the roses, her hand resting gently on her rounded belly. The past year had been a whirlwind of new experiences and challenges, but also of profound happiness and fulfillment. She had taken to her role as Duchess with a natural grace that had surprised even Julian. The estate's tenants adored her, the household staff respected her, and she had implemented several charitable programs that had significantly improved conditions in the surrounding villages. "Your Grace," Mrs. Whitmore approached with obvious satisfaction, "the preparations for this evening's dinner party are complete. Lord and Lady Pemberton have arrived, as have the other guests." "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll be in shortly." Tonight they were hosting a gathering to celebrate the first anniversary of their wedding, and Beatrice reflected on how much had changed since that dramatic evening at Lady Pembroke's ball. The woman who had kissed a stranger to save him from humiliation had become a confident duchess, beloved by her husband and respected by society. "There you are," Julian's voice came from behind her, warm with affection and amusement. "I've been looking everywhere for you." She turned to find him approaching through the garden paths, still as handsome and commanding as ever, but with a contentment in his expression that had not been there before their marriage. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since we first met," she said, accepting his embrace with the easy affection that had grown between them. "And are you happy with those changes?" he asked, his hands coming to rest on her growing belly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Beatrice replied honestly. "You've given me everything I never dared to dream of. Love, purpose, a family of our own." "You've given me far more," Julian said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've given me a home, a true partnership, and soon a child to carry on our legacy of love." As they walked back toward the house together, Beatrice marveled at the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. A single impulsive act of courage had transformed two lives completely, proving that sometimes the most unexpected moments could lead to the greatest happiness. The woman who had kissed a stranger to save him had indeed saved the richest duke in England, but more importantly, she had saved herself, finding in his love the courage to become everything she was meant to be. Their love story had begun with scandal and surprise, but it had evolved into something far more precious, a partnership built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the kind of deep, abiding love that would last a lifetime. As they rejoined their guests for the anniversary celebration, both Beatrice and Julian knew that their greatest adventures still lay ahead. Together, they would face whatever challenges the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that their love could overcome any obstacle. The kiss that had shocked London society had become the foundation of the most enduring love story of their generation, proving that sometimes the most scandalous beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. Did Beatrice's courageous kiss that saved the richest duke capture your heart? If this tale of how one impulsive act of bravery transformed scandal into the love story of the century moved you, please like this story and subscribe for more captivating Regency romances. Share this with someone who believes that true courage can change everything in an instant. Which moment made your heart race most? The dramatic public kiss, Julian's surprising identity reveal, or their beautiful wedding? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest romantic adventures where love conquers all expectations.